A lot of people are talking about non-native EMF and the impact that it has on our health. Today, I'm talking with Nick Pineault, who is an expert on this topic, and we're going to talk in particular about children and women who are pregnant and how these situations differ from an adult, as well as how you can protect yourself in simple and easy ways, even if you live in a city. I think that when we talk about non-native EMF, the conversation can often go very dark and get very scary quickly. So I really wanted to talk with somebody who lives in an urban environment, who has a child, who actually understands modern life, and then how we can best protect ourselves and mitigate ourselves from that environment. Now, if you really enjoyed this conversation and you want to learn more about children and non-native EMFs and how to just protect them, whether you're a parent, you're pregnant, or you're a grandparent, make sure you head down to the show notes to check out Nick's EMF Hazards Summit, which is happening this April. There'll be a link so that you can sign up to it for free, and you're going to learn a ton about this topic. And again, walk away feeling empowered rather than scared, which is always what I hope for anybody listening to this podcast. Enjoy this episode. A lot of people are quick to talk about the benefits of sunlight, but what gets often missed in the conversation is the benefit of darkness and the importance of protecting yourself from blue and green light after sunset. That is why I choose Viva Rays as my go-to source for protecting my circadian rhythms. You can use the code YOGI to save 15% off at Viva Rays. Now, you may have seen some of these studies popping up. I call them fear mongering about blue blockers not being effective. And that is a partial truth, because when you use blue blockers that are clear or that have not been tested with a spectrometer to actually block what they say they do, they will not protect your circadian rhythms. And they are not catching those key wavelengths that you need to be blocking in order for your body to be able to repair, for you to make melatonin, which is a master antioxidant. And artificial light at night has been in the scientific literature extensively linked to a host of hormonal cancers, obesity, diabetes, and all sorts of metabolic issues. That again is why I choose Viva Rays as my go-to source for protecting my circadian rhythms to allow my body to get adequate darkness at night. You can use the code YOGI to save 15% over at Viva Rays, and you can actually trust that they block the frequencies of light that they say they do. Thanks to Viva Rays for sponsoring today's podcast. If you've been listening to the podcast for a while, you know I'm a huge fan of red light therapy for improving skin health, mitochondrial health, and just boosting your overall energy. I often get asked if the red light therapy face masks are worth it. And to be honest with you, I am really, really choosy when it comes to red light therapy face masks because of two issues. Number one, a lot of the masks actually have really high non-native EMF, which can actually denate any benefits that you're giving your mitochondria. And you really don't want a lot of non-native EMF so close to your head. Number two, a lot of the masks don't really use the therapeutic wavelengths that are shown to improve skin health, boost collagen, and have a therapeutic benefit on skin. So that's why I really like the Bond Charge mask. I've tested it with my meter. It is very low EMF, very safe for the face. And they use the targeted wavelengths that have been shown to improve skin, to boost collagen, and to just help you get that overall glow that you are looking for with a red light therapy mask. Check out the Bond Charge Red Light Therapy Mask. You can use my code Sarah Kleiner, all one word, to save. There's a link down in the show notes. It's very easy to use, easy to clean, and it actually works and it's safe. Hope you enjoy. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the show. I'm really glad to have someone here with me who is going to talk about EMFs in our kids, EMFs in our really sensitive populations, but not in a fear-inducing way. I hope that there's empowerment in the conversation. Nick, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, I love this topic because, when I was trying to get pregnant back in 2021, I was doing all the things. And one of the things that was just like, ugh, really was the EMF portion. I just was
For
very
sure.
hesitant because it's one of those things you can't see necessarily, but it is something that I did before pregnancy that I think was very helpful for fertility. And then during pregnancy. And then, of course, after pregnancy with my son, it's like I'm very cognizant of these things. So I'm excited to chat about this.
For sure. And it's something that I started appreciating just, for myself when I started digging into it in 2016. But I must say that it became even more urgent in my mind when my wife was pregnant. It
Mhm.
just changes your mindset, as
Mhm.
like a future dad, you're like, okay, what can I do to protect my kid, and what threats are there in the environment? And of course, I had published my book at this point in 2017, so I was very aware of these dangers. And thankfully, my wife, in fact, she was aware of EMFs, but she really took additional steps to protect herself during pregnancy. And I was happy about that. And of course, the change had to come from her,
Yeah.
because bugging her or making her feel self-conscious about these choices wouldn't have worked. And
No.
you have to pick your battles. But she was very she just naturally, like any mom, I think, when you have something growing inside of you, it just looks like, okay, what can I do to, protect that little thing?
Yeah.
So she got on board also, and I was happy that we made these changes at home in the end.
Yeah. And I know I have a lot of people that listen to the show that they have partners who are not cooperative.
Very common.
I
Yeah.
have one. Thankfully, he's never been addicted to AirPods. He's always been a wired guy. But I think a lot of people that listen, they have partners that are just hesitant to this information. So I appreciate that coming from you, and then how you navigated this with a pregnancy, because it is a really vulnerable time. And I think a lot of people, especially now, like all the kids having iPads and just like around all the digital stuff constantly, it's alarming. So I don't know, where do you want to start? First, before we even jump into that, you're doing a summit on this, and
Yep.
I'm gonna have a link down in the show notes that's gonna like dive deeper than we can ever even dream of diving in a 1 hour conversation. So that'll be down in the show notes. Maybe we just do a little plug for that, and then we'll jump into
For
this whole
sure, we
topic.
can talk about many aspects. I have a couple ideas of where to start a conversation for kids, but the 2025 EMF Hazards Summit, Safeguard Our Future. It's really called this way because the next generation, the generation of my kid, is the first generation that's exposed to EMFs from cradle to grave,
Yeah.
right? In
Yeah.
my youth, we were exposed to different EMFs, electricity, right, in our generation, but not to this extent.
No.
Wi-Fi, cell towers, smartphones, and especially most kids these days. I would exclude my kid from this crowd because I'm trying not to hand the kid iPad, iPhone.
Oh,
But I would say, if we look at the US or Canada where I live, the vast majority of kids in, if they have, sufficient income, and even in low income families, they have cell phones, because
yeah. Everyone does.
yeah, everyone does. So it's almost 100% of kids that are exposed cradle to grave. So that's why the event is focused on protecting those that are most vulnerable to EMS. It's
Yep.
from April 10 to 15, and we have 18 different speakers, very prominent EMF scientists that I was able to get to interview for the first time. I'm very happy about that.
Fantastic.
And also we have also a bonus interview from Robert F. Kennedy Jr. I know, some people would say yay, some other people would say no. So he's polarizing, but in the end, what I liked about that interview is that he's very well versed into the political aspect of EMFs and the safety and how can we change things. So that's a different conversation for those that are interested in, well, how come this is allowed? What can we do about it? How can we get involved? Who is responsible for these safety thresholds and is not doing their job? Hint, it's called the FCC, and they're really, essentially an industry front group at this point. So anyway, for those who want to dive into this conversation, I think it's a nice addition. And of course, now that RFK Jr. is at HHS, at least he has the potential to change things in a massive way with when it comes to EMF safety.
Yeah.
Because in the end, I've been doing this work 8 years. It shouldn't be up to people listening to a podcast to protect themselves. It should be up to, manufacturers in the first place shouldn't
Right. There's no
hand people
liability though.
devices that are unsafe. It makes
No.
no sense to
No.
ask the population to protect themselves against all these toxins. This also
Right.
goes for pesticides and heavy metals and all these things, right? So it
Yeah.
becomes it becomes
A
tough for
bigger
the average
issue.
lay person, right?
Yeah.
To listen to conversations and say, "Oh no," another thing. And
Yeah.
EMF is another thing. I think I think most people that listen to you would understand that it's a major thing. And I think
Mhm.
that most people who maybe listen to other people in nutrition or other spheres of this internet world and of health wouldn't appreciate EMF nearly enough. So I hope
Mhm.
that
Mhm.
some of them can either be converted or maybe just be nudged into action once they listen to the summit and listen to all the practical advice we also share.
Absolutely. I think it's important to, I have a hierarchy of things that I think are really important for your health, and
Hmm.
EMF is up there. That's one of the things that you want to protect yourself against, because we understand that the mitochondria are deeply affected by non-native EMF. It will shut down water production in the mitochondria. It will decrease cellular water. It will literally dehydrate your body on a cellular level. And so we can freak out about anti-nutrients and kale and go on and on and on about all these different chemicals and toxins, but the body has an innate system that's able to protect it to a certain extent from these things, and that's our cellular water, that's our mitochondria and the health of the mitochondria. So when we're putting this stuff around our bodies, the Wi-Fi, the non-native EMF, and we're wearing it on the body and being exposed to it directly, we're actually cutting down our defense system from all of these toxins. And I think that's one thing people, when they're like, what do I need to focus on when it comes to my health? I'm like, this is a basic. You need to look at things through the lens of like, what is impacting my mitochondria and what is taking down my exclusion zone water, what's bringing down the hydration level in my body. Because then if you are cellularly dehydrated, if your cells and your mitochondria don't have what they need, all these other things are going to be that much more harmful. Um, so it's a basic, and our children are, because of the way that their brains are forming and their nervous system is forming, their brain's not fully myelinated. They're way more sensitive than a 25, 30-year old adult, right?
100%. So let's start a conversation there, maybe.
Yeah.
Why are children more affected? There's many angles to this. I think some of them are quite obvious. So, for example, when you have small children that are still developing a brain and nervous system, any
Yes.
sort of toxin that could interfere with that process would be that much more dangerous because, starting with a 1 cell or 10 cell wide fetus to a teenager, you have maturation processes that need to happen until about age 25 to 30, where
25.
you
Yeah.
have the final maturation of the myelin sheath, this insulation outside the nervous system. So if it's not completely matured yet, you have a greater likeliness of EMF damage, of interference with this normal brain development. So we
Mhm.
know that it's environmental toxins of all kinds, but EMF seems to be the one that is the most often ignored. And along with light. And I think the light story, many people understand or are starting to understand. And why am I wearing, blue blockers?
Right.
I don't know. I'm opening my lights so it looks a little bit less creepy in my room here. And I wear those at a computer just to,
Yep.
it really helps me with concentration. So I don't need to do it. But again, this is mitigating a sort of EMF, an electromagnetic, a part of the electromagnetic spectrum that you can see. And yet the
Yes.
invisible part is one that is most often ignored. So we're talking
Yes.
about, of course, smartphones and Wi-Fi and tablets and Bluetooth gizmos of all kind. And the reality is that you have, not only is it more dangerous to children and teenagers and people that are, let's say, under 30 years old,
Yep.
but also they have more water in their body compared to an adult
Yes.
when you measure pound per pound, like a real comparison. So they have a greater absorption of the radiation. So it's just a matter of how, let's say, part of this radiation is in the microwave spectrum, the
Mm.
microwave radiation spectrum. So literally, a lot of people are not aware of this, but your microwave runs at 2.4 gigahertz, and your cell phone runs at around 1 gigahertz. But the Wi-Fi in your home also runs at 2.4, and
Mm.
the Bluetooth also runs at 2.45. So these are frequencies that are similar to a microwave oven. And
Yeah.
the reason the microwave oven was chosen at that frequency is that it will get absorbed by water molecules and agitate them to heat your food, right? And
Hmm.
I don't use microwave ovens. I really doubt that most people listening to this will use microwave oven,
Yeah.
and there's a reason, right? It can interfere with water molecules.
Yes.
There's enough studies for me to conclude, well, what are the long-term consequences of eating like microwave foods, let's say every day, like
Yeah.
in an abusive manner? Not only is it increasing how much plastic might go in your food, but also changing the molecular structure of water.
Hmm.
Now imagine that instead of having a very powerful microwave oven, you have a very small microwave oven, probably 1,000 to 5,000 times less power, but instead it's called an AirPod, and you put it in your ear, closer to your brain.
Hmm.
It's not going to boil your brain. It's not going to heat your tissue, although
Right.
maybe you're going to have a little bit of a heating effect. But the subtle effects long term is what we're interested in. And they're not so subtle in the end, but they are long term chronic
Yeah.
exposure. And that's really one of the things that I'm most concerned about is
Okay.
exposure close to the body for extended periods of time.
Yes.
That's both
Yeah.
true for adults, but also for children. So
Yeah.
this is really children will absorb with the same AirPods, their brain would absorb almost twice the radiation compared to an adult. So if you give AirPods to a 10-year-old, it would be twice as bad in how much is absorbed in their brain and
Mm.
throughout their face compared to an adult, just
Wow.
because
Because of the water content,
the
right?
water content and also the size of the head, right?
Mm.
And you had researchers, one of them is an engineer that was part of the original committee that was supposed to come up with a standard for cell phones that was safe. It's called the
Mhm.
SAR, the specific absorption rate. And they were trying to figure out what is the right dose of radiation someone
Mhm.
could be exposed to the head. And this determination was made just based on heating effects. So they're kind of looking at the wrong thing. They're not looking at mitochondrial effect. They're not looking at DNA damage. So
Right.
first, it's kind of a skewed or a completely flawed measurement in the first place.
Incomplete. Yeah.
Incomplete, right? It's an engineering view of the human body, which is, it's lacking the biophysics understanding of what is happening in a cell and what is happening deep down in the thousands of mitochondria inside each cell. So
Mhm.
there's that, but also they didn't think about the fact that was back in the 1980s and 90s. They didn't think about the fact that children would be using mini cell phones near their head, like AirPods
Right.
or just
Right.
cell phones or Wi-Fi tablets, for example. They didn't think about that. So to this day, there's no cell phone standard that takes into account that anyone smaller than a 6'2", 220-pound man uses a device. So our standards is still based on a model that is completely unrealistic.
Mhm.
I'm not 6'2", so maybe you can tell. It's always hard to tell through a camera. I'm 5'4". I'm a small
Mhm.
guy, 135. I don't fit the SAR measurement. If I have a phone to my head, I'm going to be exposed to substantially more radiation than their sort of mannequin head, plastic head dummy that they use for testing. So
Mhm.
in fact, I calculated that for my book back in 2017. I calculated that around 3% of cell phone users have the right head size to fit the safety standards. So
Wow.
now imagine that it's in children, right? Well, you have this researcher, Om P. Gandhi, that looked at it and he said, well, I think we have a problem. That was like something like a paper in 2006, I think, which is just,
Wow.
it's maddening because it's like 20 years ago. And he said, well, our standards that we developed, and he was kind of part of that committee, but after that, it was almost outside his control. He said, well, these standards do not take into account that we have children using technology at all, and they need to be urgently revised. That was not done. And to this day, you still have the same organizations, whether it's IEEE or the Federal Communication Commission, FCC, that says everything is fine, there's no problem, everything is safe. And we know that this is not the case. Looking
Mhm.
at a study, I wanted to cite, you talked about easy water and,
Yeah.
the fact that it impacts water. I really would want massive funding in this direction. I hope that eventually we can have that, but for the moment, we have more questions than answers.
Yeah.
There's a preprint that I came across. I'm sure you saw it. It's from the Gerald Pollack lab. He was
Oh yeah.
collaborating with one of his students on this, and they did early experiments just looking at Wi-Fi exposure and
Yep.
easy water. A
Yep.
reduction of 15-20% of
Yep.
the size of easy water in what they tested, and they said, well, Wi-Fi exposure may impact cell functionality. They needed to fund more studies. I wrote to Gerald Pollack. I asked him, where's why is it a preprint?
Yeah.
Where is it
I
published?
asked them the same thing,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. And
Yeah.
then I learned, well, that student kind of, went away or something. It wasn't clear. He kind of, almost left the country and, didn't give him news. So it was never published officially, and then
Right.
no follow-up studies. So these lines of research are just, I'm thinking about it from time to time. I'll be just, cooking or something. I'll be like, oh no, easy water and Wi-Fi. Like, what are the implications, and why
Yeah.
don't we have several experiments or the entire Pollack lab, like having, I don't know, 500K to $1 million to do experiments and
Yeah.
then conclude, yes, Wi-Fi or other sources of EMFs interfere with easy water.
Right.
Therefore, we recommend urgently taking that into account when determining safety. We don't have that. So I
Right.
hope we can get to this point, but the early indications, whether it's that or other studies I saw where radiofrequency radiation, which is microwave radiation, impacts the structure of water in ways that sometimes are said to be permanent. So permanently alter water structure, whether it's I don't you understand water structure way better than me, but whether it's like the number of molecules in clusters, or there's
Mhm.
certain characteristics of the water, including how the water would absorb certain frequencies in certain
Exactly.
sets of light. It is changed. It is
Yep.
changed permanently in the water. So what are
Yep.
the implications if we're a big bag of
Of water.
water, right?
Yeah. Babies are like
Huge.
50% water, I think, when they're born, or even more, because not 50%. An elderly person is 50%. A baby is like 90% water. Those are
They're
the,
like jellyfish when
yeah,
they're born.
literally like 90% water.
Yeah,
What
yeah.
ages us is this loss of water, because when someone is old, when they're about to pass away, usually they're about 50% water, sometimes even less. And so that whole you're 70% water thing is actually not 100% accurate, because if you're a little baby, or you're someone who's really old, and or you've got a lot of diseases going on in your body, you have less water. It's the water content. And so when we think about health in regards to water, and we think about what all these frequencies are doing to this water in the body, it's the implications are tremendous,
For
and
sure.
because there are so many other studies as well that I've pulled a bunch of stuff. I'm sure you've gone far beyond what I've pulled, but showing uh, metabolic issues from Wi-Fi non-native EMF, like teenagers, basically inducing diabetes from being around large amounts of radiation. And it's like, why are we not concerned about this with our children, with the metabolic epidemic right now, with children already struggling with all these obesity? Children are getting diabetes, like children are really really sick now, like really sick. And yeah, the food is terrible. Like there's so many people talking about the food, there's people talking about the toxins, but to take away a kid's iPad or a kid's cell phone is like, oh no, that's not, that can't have anything to do with anything, right?
Yeah, and the diabetes link, or a change in blood glucose,
Yeah.
the ability to regulate blood glucose,
Yes.
it is something that is discussed when it comes to blue light. Like, we know we're
Yes.
overexposed to blue light at night, and it's a risk factor for diabetes
Cancer.
because of how it will negatively impact your ability to
Insulin.
sleep, and therefore increase blood glucose spikes. We know that if you have sleep deprivation, directly you're going to have a link or a correlation with people that are pre-diabetic or diabetic, because your ability to regulate blood sugar will be impacted by lack of sleep. So there's
Yeah.
that, but also Dr. Paul Heru, that is one of the speakers in the summit, that's really someone that I would study further for anyone interested in mitochondrial health, because he's the only researcher who told me directly about mitochondrial impacts. His work was on cancer cells and how they behave when exposed to electromagnetic fields. And what he found in cancer cells could be extrapolated in how healthy cells react. And, he was kind of playing around with that. And what he said is that in his lab, he's now able to use certain frequencies in the microwave range to kill cancer cells or to kill healthy cells or to modify behavior. So he's trying to find, and he doesn't even have the sufficient funding for this, but he's trying to find which frequencies or which intensities could be used therapeutically, because it's true they could be used therapeutically to some extent. Is that the most elegant way to cure cancer? Maybe not, but that's a question for another day. But that being said, if we find which frequencies or which intensities are most damaging to biology, there's a possibility of at least forcing industry to use different frequencies as we also change our entire infrastructure and start relying less on wireless. But what I'm talking about is making Wi-Fi safer,
Yes.
making cell towers safer. Could it be
Yes.
done? I asked him the question. He told me, well, in my lab, I have the ability to study all of this if I had sufficient funding. In his mind, there is a possibility that we make this technology tremendously safer.
Mm.
Then he also told me about something that I think never really talked about before, but people that listen to you would love this. Li-Fi. Maybe you talked about it
Heard of
before,
it.
but
Mhm.
never heard of it. Okay, that's even better.
Yeah.
So there's now developments of people who want to take a light bulb and
Mm.
turn it into a Wi-Fi emitter, but it's a
Oh, yeah.
Li-Fi emitter, light-based
Oh,
communication.
okay.
The advantage of light is that light starts in the hundreds of thousands, in the hundreds of thousands of gigahertz, rather
Mm.
than 1 gigahertz for a cell phone, or 2.4 or 5.8 gigahertz for a Wi-Fi. So it means that there's a possibility of cramming a ton of information on a light signal. But then I asked Dr. Hiru, I asked, what do you think of the Li-Fi developments? They've proven the concept. In fact, right now, I think you can find Li-Fi emitters where you would have, let's say, something that plugs into your computer, and then you would install something on your lights, and your
Mhm.
lights would be connected to the internet through router. So now your lights are emitting a sort of information, and it's getting picked up by your laptop, for example. But I
Mhm.
told them, okay, and the first, I'm sure you have that in mind. It's like, okay, what are the implications? What are you doing to this light in order to send information? And are we recreating the same problem, right? Because you
Right.
wouldn't
That's
see a difference on the visible light spectrum, but
Mhm.
what they're doing is chopping the signal or adding flicker, and in a way where it's not perceptible to the human eye. But it's not the only thing that picks up signal, because
right.
you guys listening to this know better. You have receptors on your skin, you have receptors in your eyes, and even the eye can pick up signals that are invisible to you.
Yes.
It's below your level of perception, and yet, for
Right.
example, flicker of light that is so fast you don't perceive it can
Mhm.
impact your brain and does impact your
Right.
brain. So I
Right.
asked him, okay, what do you think of these developments? And he said, well, can it be made safe? Maybe, but the engineers developing Wi-Fi or other alternatives to the wireless do not have safety in mind. They think everything is safe. So again, I would be very prudent to jump on like, oh, Li-Fi is the solution. Let's use that instead. Well, I know better. Now, are we
Yeah.
going to have to protect ourselves and cover ourselves like
Or
this because my
another
Li-Fi
thing.
is, sending the wrong circadian rhythm information to my
Oh
body?
yeah, definitely. When you
Right.
first said it, I cringed. I was like, "Oh,
Well, exactly.
I'm
So,
already it's already a no and I don't know anything about it." Maybe that's
well, you have the
premature of
right
me, but
reflex. But
Yeah,
you're thinking about this in a the quantum perspective, the ancestral perspective.
right.
Is it okay to tamper with light? Well, we already know that there's a bunch of problems when it comes to having artificial light
Mhm.
exposures at the wrong timing, especially at the wrong timing. But
Sure.
even during the day, when you have
Even during the
a screen
day.
like this,
Yeah,
like you disrupt your circadian rhythm, you
yeah.
disrupt metabolism. You talk a lot about you disrupt your hormones. Your
Mhm.
body is not functioning the way it should. So if you add the wrong light in the mix, it's not a true alternative, but it could be made tremendously safer. I don't know if they could come up with something where it can agree with biology,
Yeah,
but that's just I I'm not holding my breath at the moment
yeah.
because it will take a lot of time. But a lot of these alternatives, and let me know if you want to focus on this, but a lot of the alternatives are using more wires or using safer
Mhm,
habits, and in
mhm.
the end, it will stay true even through the next several decades of technological development. It will be like being mindful about what you decide to bring into your home. And then when you do bring devices into your home, how do you use them? Right?
Mhm.
Because there's
Mhm.
like a good way to use them that is minimizing exposure.
Right.
And there's an abusive way to use them where you expose yourself or your kids to the maximum amount of radiation and potential risks.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's we're in a world, we're in a society that and I know we talked about this the last time you were on the podcast, or we can't necessarily escape it. It's not even if you move to the jungle, even if you move somewhere off grid, that they're going to find you. They're going to put up a tower. They're going to put up a satellite. It's going to be nearly impossible to escape a lot of this stuff. And so I think what a lot of my listeners and my community appreciate are conversations around how do we make ourselves safe? What are the things that, are BS essentially? Like I don't think people are going to get a lot of protection from like putting stickers on their phones and things like that. I'm like, just don't have the phone in the bedroom with you at night when you're sleeping. Like, put it in the bathroom. You can turn the ringer all the way up in case you're worried that someone's going to call you and you need to hear it, but like, don't put it next to your bed when you're sleeping. Don't wear Apple watches. I don't even wear an Aura ring. I know you can put those on airplane mode, but I don't even like that. I don't like anything and I don't want to track every biometric all the time. It just makes me kind of crazy. So maybe we can talk about that in regards to kids because now, and I'm trying to figure out ways because my son's only 2, he's 2.5. I'm like, I know we're not going to a regular school. I can't do it because they're going to be under the blue light. They're giving all the kids iPads. They don't let them go outside very often. I just can't see that as like a healthy way for a kid to grow up. Um, so what does a parent do or a grandparent? Because I know I have a lot of grandparents that listen to the show also. What can someone actually practically do in this world where it seems to be kind of inescapable?
It is. And again, there are some use cases where kids are very, very close to devices. And that's where I would be the most concerned personally. Like, I can tell you, let's go through everything we did for our kid to minimize radiation at different ages. So when
Perfect.
my wife was
Start with
pregnant,
pregnancy. Yeah.
yeah, so it starts with pregnancy. If you're able to protect your belly,
I wore a
even when
belly
it's
band.
small, the
Yeah.
belly bands, they are good, and you've got also blankets that can be
Mhm.
used. For example, if you are on your phone, my wife was, she uses Instagram and all these
Yeah.
things, and hold on a second. Let me grab this. Sorry. This is a converter, right?
Yeah.
This
I
is a
got one.
converter
Yep.
between Ethernet and this is an older port that's going to be phased out, but a Lightning to Ethernet converter. So in the corner of our living room, now we have a cable that's plugged into
Mhm.
our router, and that goes, it's a little bit hidden by the wall, not to be too annoying. And then my wife is able to connect her phone through
Yep.
Ethernet when she is on Instagram. And what is nice about it is, of course, you don't use your cell phone plan or anything like
Right.
that. And people
It's
these days are
fast.
moving towards like maximum like bandwidth, but also it's fast, it's
Mhm.
reliable, you can upload large videos, there's no problem. So it is a convenient way to connect. So that's the safest way to have a phone or a laptop, is to be connected via Ethernet. It will always stay through.
Mhm.
And then,
And
the
turn your
next,
Bluetooth off too. That was one
yeah,
thing
turning off
I
the Bluetooth, turning off the Wi-Fi antenna on the machine, whether
Mhm.
it's a tablet or smartphone or laptop.
Laptop.
If you have Wi-Fi,
Yep.
being on Wi-Fi and having the device close to your abdomen is a bad idea during pregnancy. If you have
Yes.
to do it, it should be for seconds and not minutes. So try to minimize it, right? It's
Mhm.
a lot of people, I think the way I perceive what they think in their mind as beginners, they think, oh, these cell phone towers out there, they're very dangerous for my baby, the Wi-Fi router, but the closest sources are their own devices. They're
Right.
always on
Right.
devices within
Right.
a foot, of their fetus. So in
Yeah.
reality, it's wearing the belly blanket if you can during the day. And then
Mhm.
if you are on a computer, if you are on a phone, on a tablet, it's your responsibility to make sure, it's not too close, or to use a
Yep.
blanket, for example, an EMF blocking blanket, and to make sure that the blanket is between your belly and the source. Not, you're not using the phone underneath the blanket,
Oh,
which would,
that will make
reflect
it
the
worse,
radiation
right?
back. Yeah, you
Yeah.
make things
Yeah.
worse. That's true. So
Yeah.
so this is something to consider. For what we've done in this household, when people enter our home, they ask for Wi-Fi, and I tell them there's no Wi-Fi. My Wi-Fi is turned off inside my router. So that's something that can be done on most routers these days, not all. But
Mhm.
if yours has these options in the settings, you can turn off the Wi-Fi antenna and then connect everything with wires. That's something
Hardwire.
we've done
Yep.
because we realized it's a relatively small apartment. It's a
Yep.
condo. It's built in like a long corridor, like a lot of places in Montreal are. And not only was the Wi-Fi very bad in this office space that happens to be my bedroom at the same time, it's a large room and I work in a little corner. So the Wi-Fi was annoying. The quality was bad. My Zoom calls were dropping. So now
Mm.
I had the choice. What do I do about it? Either I
Yep.
install a stronger Wi-Fi, which is right, you're filling your place with more radiation and with like these kind of gaming type Wi-Fi routers with 5 antennas.
Uh,
But then not only are you having better connectivity here, but you're kind of filling your entire environment with more radiation. And
right.
when your kid is young and trying to sleep during the day, you're interfering with that sleep. And then
Yep.
my kid was playing in the living room a lot, which was, a few feet away from the Wi-Fi router.
Router. Yeah.
So it is a bad situation. And what I would tell parents is that, if you have Wi Fi, that's okay. But if you have a kid that's playing around the Wi Fi router and, no one is using Wi Fi, which is, more often than not the case. Like it's,
Yep.
you might have people that stay with the kids when they're very young at home or a nanny and no one is using the Wi Fi. Turn it off.
Yeah.
Only open the Wi-Fi when you need it, and right there you're gonna vastly minimize the amount of time that your kid is spending near the router. So that's one thing. And then I would say, as they're getting older, the temptation is handing them a phone,
Phone or an
handing them a
iPad.
Wi-Fi tablet, and all these things. I would say the number one strategy that I share in this summit in 2025 was simply pre-download this
Yep.
stuff,
That's what I
right?
do for my daughter because it's
Always. And this
yeah.
is still to this
Everything
day, I
is
hear a lot of parents
pre-downloaded.
that are like shocked that this is even feasible. Like, oh, you can pre-download materials. Well, you
Yeah.
can, for example, even on most apps, like the Netflix app
YouTube.
does, the
Mm-hmm.
Disney Plus app does, Spotify for songs, or I don't know, lullabies or anything like you want. You can
Mm-hmm.
in fact go on a tablet, and that's fine if you're on Wi-Fi. You figure out, can this app give me the option to download anything? And
Yep.
most do. And when you download it, it's in the tablet, it's stored there. And these
Yep.
tablets now have very large hard drives. You
Memory.
can store
Yeah.
like, entire series on Netflix and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And then it's up to you to minimize screen time. That's a bit of a separate conversation. But of course, if sometimes it is practical and during long trips, I would understand perfectly if parents use, entertainment and songs and things like that, for sure. But you don't have to be streaming it. If you're
Right.
streaming, the tablet is emitting 100% of the possible radiation. It's like
Yep.
the worst case scenario. If you're playing local content and you go under the Wi-Fi icon and make sure it's crossed off, you turn it off, then it emits no wireless radiation. So right there, if all the content that the kid listens to, or the vast majority of it, is not on Wi-Fi, then you've really eliminated 99% of the problem for your kid when they're
Mhm.
exposed to it. Certain apps even allow you to play offline, but you got to verify which do, which don't. And for us, we were able to have Elliot play on certain apps that can be played offline. But then we realized, okay, this educational app, we really love it, but you need to be online. Okay, well, we have a different thing like this, except
Plug it
it's
in.
USB-C to Ethernet.
Mhm.
And we have a, what is it, Kindle Fire tablet. It could be iPad, of course, or any alternatives. All the different tablets can do it. You can be on Ethernet cables. And
Mhm.
think about it. Even if you do have a Wi-Fi router, and even if the Wi-Fi antenna is still on, the most dangerous thing is not necessarily your router,
Your
because your
body.
router is further away.
Mhm.
The Wi-Fi chip inside the tablet is close to you. So if you turn off Wi-Fi and you connect it, and the Wi-Fi router is just sitting there, and yes, of course, it's a source of exposure, but it's further away, the
Right.
tablet becomes much safer. So
Yes.
don't be afraid of, having a long cable, especially if your kid, like, is going to be maybe watching a little bit of a TV show on the sofa or something, and then connect the tablet with an Ethernet cable. And each time you do, you're going to remove potential risks, potential harms for children.
Yeah. And I always put the phone screen on red for my daughter just because I know what blue light does to the mitochondria and
Yeah.
water production. So with her, I'm like, okay, she's 17, but she does have a lot of health challenges. So it's like everything's downloaded off of YouTube, all of her songs and favorite things, and then it's on airplane mode. Bluetooth is off, and the phone it's red. We turn it red, and that I'm like, I feel okay with her doing it. We still don't let her stay attached to it all day long. And my son, who's 2.5, I'm like, no, no, we don't. We don't
Yeah.
do
Yeah.
that. I actually have a no cocoa melon rule in my house. Like, no, because it makes them crazy. I'm like, no, it gets him too hyper. I'm like, no, I'm not. That's just not happening in this house. So
Yeah, it is very
stimulating.
very stimulating. And in
Yeah.
fact, I mean, there's lawsuits against Coco Melon that I read about, I
Really?
think, if a few months ago, because of the addictive properties. And it's
Yeah.
I mean, Coco Melon is like the example of, you
Horrible.
produce a show and you use all the right triggers to make sure
Yeah.
that kids can watch as much as humanly possible
Yeah.
without guardrails for entertainment and technology. You have people that play within, legality, but not necessarily morality or
Right.
ethics. So they
Right.
say, okay, well, you know what, this is legal, we're going to make a show that's so addictive that people are going to watch. And
Yeah.
that's almost your, in a sense, that's almost your role as, a show producer. You want that show to be good
Yeah.
and to be,
Yeah.
but they go too far. It's like,
It's,
the Oreo cookies of TV, like
yeah, it
where
is.
it's been engineered to keep people watching, right?
Mhm.
Uh,
Mhm.
and I would also want to share some things for teenagers because, of course, a lot of parents, even listening to our summit, will be like, okay, well, that's very nice of you, Nick, but it's too late for me. Like, I just learned this information as a parent, or I'm a grandparent, but everyone
Right.
is grown up. They have like 10 to 12 to 17-year old. Like, how can I get them interested in it? So you have certain parents that, just first preach by example. It's
Mhm.
huge. If
Yeah.
you are on your phone all the
Right.
time, you cannot expect your kids to do any differently.
Right.
So being mindful, and then talking about it, like talking about the fact that, yes, if you are exposed to these technologies all the time, like, some people feel better when they're not, and making your teenagers empowered to kind of feel things for themselves.
Differently.
And they
Yeah.
might have to, it's kind of hard to say, but they might have to suffer a little
Yeah.
bit
You're like a
and feel it. So
dopamine
if
detox.
they're restless, like if they have a hard time sleeping, you might suggest, there's science showing that these things, emit a sort of radiation, and it kind of messes with your
Disrupts
brain a
the
bit.
pineal gland, right?
Yeah,
That's
it
what I've
does.
seen. Yeah, and that's the we if we're not making melatonin, we're not resting, we're not restoring, we're not healing. It's massive. This other
It
gal
is.
I follow has been posting all this research on the pineal gland and people's pineal gland being calcified in their 20s. And I'm like, why are we not and there's lots of things can do that. Seed oils can actually do that, believe it or not. There's research for that, but
Really.
non-native EMF is a huge one that is calcifying the pineal gland. And guess what, if you're not making pineal melatonin, you're aging very, very quickly, very quickly.
Yep.
It's
Antioxidant defenses are down,
yeah.
and it's melatonin, and then there's vast amounts of studies of population level studies where you have correlations like the closer you live to cell towers, the less
Yes.
glutathione you have, SOD
Yes.
catalase. So quite simply, over time, what could it do over time? All your defenses go down, just like when you are exposed to so many environmental toxins that eventually your detoxification pathways are
Right.
trying to do something, but to no avail, right? Because you keep eating certain ingredients that are contaminated, or maybe you still drink tap water. And right here in Montreal, we have a massive lead piping problem, just
Oh,
like
we have a
Flint, Michigan.
huge problem in Georgia. I
It's
mean, there's
huge.
like
Yeah.
there's a
So,
billion-dollar lawsuit going on in my county right now, and they're
oh
like, "Oh,
my God.
we need 10 more years to fix this." I'm like, what's the average person supposed to do for drinking water that's not educated like me? Like, it's insane.
Yeah,
It's
I
everywhere.
agree.
It's
Yeah,
everywhere.
it is. And just to go back a little bit, not to get sidetracked, to sidetrack myself here, but for teenagers, preaching by example only goes so far.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
uh, for some very, very addicted teens, some parents told me, I don't know if you should do that. Of course, you are kind of the master of your own household, but
Right.
some parents, because they realized the teens were always on devices, they locked the devices away in a
Yeah. You
box
have to. You have
at
to.
night. So
Yeah.
for some teenagers, it's kind of a fight, but for some of them it works. That's If that's not a possibility, you have to start negotiating,
Yeah.
like, what is the healthy amount of screen time. We do have, I cannot recall the app, but Dr. Evan Hirsch in our summit talks
Mhm.
about different apps that parents use to be able to minimize screen
Shut down
time
the
or kind of
apps. Yeah.
negotiate. It's to me, when I think about that, I have a 6-year-old. So when I think about
Yeah.
that, I feel uneasy about it, as
Yeah.
if, as a parent, I'll start being like a fascist in my home. But at the
Yeah.
same time, I have to recognize for myself that with this new reality, that these devices have been designed, again, just like Coco Melon, the
Addicted.
smartphone interface or
Yeah.
Instagram or TikTok, it's been engineered to be addictive. So
Yeah.
therefore, fighting against it, you cannot be too soft. So sometimes you have to put an end to things. And
Mhm.
there's good studies for children that have, especially, like, that have huge mental health problems, whether
Yes.
it's younger children or teenagers. Some of them feel so much better when you take devices away. Not on day
Yeah.
one, not on day
No.
3, but after a week or
Yeah.
weeks of literally detoxifying their brains
Yeah.
against these habits, their dopamine system gets reboot. And maybe, of course, you follow your advice and they get in the sun and they get
Right.
earthing and they get
Yeah.
all the right things. They might come back to life in a sense, like, oh
Yeah.
my God, I used to be so neurotic, or maybe I had these social anxieties, or I had panic attacks, and
Mhm.
all sorts of problems can go away or can greatly reduce if they stop being so glued to the device. It's
Yeah.
keeping their brain in a loop of anxiety or depression. And it is not only the social media and the blue light and the radio frequency exposure, it's kind of the synergy of all of it that's
Mhm.
becoming very toxic to the brain. So
Yeah.
this is what I would say is simply, if you have a child or a teen that is older and you see them struggling big time, then you need to be more serious about it and really consider the impact of devices in their life. And sometimes that fight, I know it's difficult. I saw that
Yeah.
fight, my parents fight with my brother on many things. And
Yeah.
but it is a new fight that parents have to go through now. It's the fight against technology. And one thing that was recommended in the summit and kind of a video series we have with the summit recordings is there are ways to make AirPods less bad. I would tell, like, I wouldn't say safe, but there are sort of stickers, but they're not a sticker that uses pyramids or subtle
Yeah.
energy devices. They physically block signals on
Hmm.
AirPods, and they reduce the impact about 90%.
Oh,
What I said is, you know, if nothing else works, tell your teenagers, okay, you have to use them on your AirPods, and that's a non-negotiable, even
yeah.
for, reluctant husbands or I say husbands, it's not something against men, but it's
That's tough.
90% of the problem is like the reluctant husband.
Yep.
10% is the reluctant wife. To be honest, is the way
Yeah.
that people write to me, and kind of the
True.
statistics in
Same.
my mind. It's very realistic. I don't know. Maybe that's because men, some of them think, oh, it's BS and they know better and this is tinfoil hatter stuff. I
Yeah.
don't know, but women tend to be more sensitive, or
More
feel the impacts
attuned.
of the
Yeah.
of wireless technology and feel the changes sooner than men. They're
Yeah.
just numb to the environment and
Yep.
and don't really see the difference. So I would say, these are things, including EMF blocking cases that can be purchased. If you see
Mhm.
your teen always has a cell phone in the pocket,
Oof.
maybe as a last resort, you say, okay, look, use this case, please. Like, only use this case, and then
Yeah.
try to teach them. And it's a long journey. For me, it took me a good 3 years to start actually walking my talk. I read about EMFs and
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
understood it on a intellectual level, and it was all nice. But then I started realizing, wait a minute, my router is right there in my office, makes no
Right.
sense, and making changes took me years. So
Yeah.
I can appreciate the fact that this is tough. It's a tough journey. You're going against all of society, right? We're
Society.
moving,
Exactly. It's like we've
moving.
already asked you to
Yeah,
stop eating the poison food and looking out for all these
exactly.
toxins. And then we go a step further and ask you to make your life a whole lot less convenient. But, I think, and I don't know how you feel about this with the kids and what I'm planning to do with my son. I'll keep everybody posted on how this goes, but I just want to teach him about these things and talk to him about these things. And like you said, allow them to feel the difference. Take him out into nature, put him out in a natural environment, grounding sunshine as much as possible, because you can feel a difference. What you said about the men kind of being more numbed out, I was very numbed out to non-native EMF until I
Mm.
actually started trying to get pregnant and realizing, like, oh, I'm wearing AirPods all day long. I've got my router on. I'm sitting beside my router. When I changed all of that, I felt a difference. I didn't feel such a difference when I was doing all those things, but when I cut myself off from those things, I was like, whoa, my energy went up. I
Yeah.
slept better. Like, everything shifted. And then going back into an environment that had a bunch of blue light and non-native EMF going, I could feel it. I suddenly became more sensitive. So I think most people are in this low lying, like, numbed out state to the non-native EMF. If you can go put yourself out in nature, if you can change things in your own home, you'll notice a difference, I think. And the kids are like what we've already talked about in this show is like the kids, they don't have a developed nervous system. They're made of so much more water than they are. So their bodies are like these little antennas absorbing all of this, and they're just much more vulnerable to all of these things. And it's our job as parents and grandparents, to the best of our ability, to protect them. That's our responsibility. And so the more of these conversations, I'm so excited for people to head to the show notes and check out your summit. I'll have a link down there. Um, let's get this out there. Let's really empower people to have these conversations with their kids and to make these changes, because it is the health of the future.
100%. And, we have, just in closing, we do have one conversation, especially on how EMFs might impact autism risks.
Mm,
That's something Dr. Dietrich Klinghardt talked about in
yes.
the past, and he did studies, one case study or case study series on many of his patients who were more exposed during pregnancy, and then their likeliness of having a child that was not neurotypical went up. It's not that surprising. We do have very good animal studies and also population level studies on the more fetuses are exposed to smartphone radiation or Wi-Fi, and the more likeliness that when these infants are born and then later in life, up to 6 to 8 years old, was the follow-up studies, I think, the more likely they are to develop ADD, ADHD
Yeah.
symptoms, which is a mark of, you know, I'd say a difficult time regulating your nervous system or
Yes.
regulating your brain. So there's
Yes.
something going on, right? In
Yeah.
how these kids are able to develop later in life, and
Yeah.
also their risks of food intolerance or
Yeah.
allergies. So there's something about the immune system that is impacted. So everything is intertwined, right? So we have the indications that the more exposed they are, the younger, the worse it is, and that's
Yeah.
really what we're trying to tell people that are parents or grandparents is this is really an invitation to try to help do your best to protect the next generation.
Yep.
It's we're in a very bad spot. I'm an optimist, but I have to recognize with EMFs, it has not gotten better since I started this work. I knew
Right.
it would get way worse before getting better. Right now, things are getting worse still with the rollout of all these technologies. So
Yeah.
we're in a spot where I have to recognize it is tempting to throw your hands in the air and think, there's nothing you can do about it, but
Right.
you can still do a ton,
Yeah.
and you should do what you can do, which is, control your own devices, control your home environment, try to do your best. And then
Hardwire.
when you're in vacation and you're in an outside environment and, there's only junk
The
food
first
and,
thing I
and,
do is unplug the Wi-Fi when I get
well,
to
you do your best
Airbnb.
again, but you know that when you come back home, the environment is cleaner is
Yes.
cleaner. So it's really
You
the
feel it.
habits that you develop over like those maybe 50 weeks that you're not traveling,
Yeah.
and then during your 2 weeks you're traveling, don't freak out about it and
Yeah.
try to just be mindful of these things and make your home as clean as possible. That's really the
Yeah.
overall message here.
Yeah, and I wanna qualify one more thing because I know we gotta wrap, you gotta go. We like I said in the very beginning, neither you do not live in the jungle. I'm gonna use you as the example. You're the
No,
expert here. You don't live in the jungle. You live in Montreal. I think when we first met, you were, like, in Tokyo.
that's
Like
true.
yeah, and so you don't isolate your family, you live in a condo, so it is possible to live in an urban environment, to live, even in a condo, right, an apartment, and practice these things and protect your kids and protect yourself, because I think people with this EMF conversation, they just get freaked out, and they're like, "Oh my
Yeah.
god, what do I do?" And it's like, the inverse square law. Remember that at the end of the day, you have control over what's on your body, what's touching your body, what's in proximity to your body to a certain extent. And that's the best you can do. And I think those things really do go a long way, right?
They do, and this is so key because in the end, you're if you live in nature, you're probably in a better spot than I am, right?
Yeah.
I am
Yeah.
exposed by cell towers, I am exposed by neighbors, but focus on your own things first is it will always stay true regardless of how polluted the environment is outside,
Yeah.
right? The air quality in my home is the same.
Same.
I cannot control Montreal traffic and tell people stop using cars. There's smog. Well,
Right.
not gonna happen. So when I go outside, am I going to go in a hazmat or something? No, I'm gonna breathe in some of the pollution. But inside, I started using more air filtration.
Yeah.
I
We've got
had
adjusters.
an
Yep.
air expert come in and take
Same.
measurements, and it was pretty clean. I was happy with that.
Same.
But I'm
Yeah.
trying to improve my environment on many levels, not just EMFs. When
Filter
it
your
comes to
water,
EMFs, yeah,
food.
exactly. It's the
Yeah.
same thing,
Yeah.
right? If you already take care of your air, the toxins in your home, you have also to get EMFs right. And the message is we're trying to make it as simple as possible for you to take action and to
Yep.
at least start somewhere and start the conversation.
Yep, definitely. I think it's important. Well, I'm very excited for people to head down to the show notes and check out your summit and all of your great resources. I think this is just going to be so valuable for so many people. Where else could people find you if they wanted to learn more, if they wanted to find more of your information beyond the summit?
Sure, just look at theemfguy.com. I have, my book, courses, and also a ton of free information on my podcast and YouTube channel.
Fantastic. Well, we'll make sure that's all linked for everybody. And Nick, it's been fantastic. I think this is a really helpful and empowering conversation for people. It's not based in fear and trying to get people upset. It's more of like, hey, we're going to help you put some of this back into your own hands. And that's what I try to do here on the show. And I appreciate you for coming today.
Thanks so much. I appreciate you, and I know that you've been talking about these dangers, and you are one of the very few who are actively sharing about these dangers of technology. So thank you for your work, and I'm sure that people listening to this already are in such a good position compared to the average layperson, and that's thanks to you. And I hope that they can just get better and better with time with EMFs, and that would just help their entire life and the life of their family.
Thank you, Nick. I appreciate you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much for listening to the Evolving Wellness Podcast. Just a quick little reminder, this is not medical advice nor meant to be taken as a substitute for working one-on-one with a healthcare practitioner. And if you enjoy the show, please head on over to Apple or Spotify to leave the show up to a 5-star review. If you're over on YouTube, please leave us a like, leave us a comment. I really appreciate you for being here, for listening to the show, and your support means the world to me as I continue to try to pull guests from around the world to bring you informative content to empower you to make decisions about your own health. Thank you so much for being here, and I look forward to seeing you again next week.